For 5 years, Audrey was a ghost in her own marriage, hidden in the penthouse while Harrison Evans conquered Wall Street. The world viewed her as a silent accessory, a woman with no voice and no power. That illusion ended the night of the Met Gala. Tonight, we unravel a story of revenge that isn't just a breakup, it is a public execution. When the invisible wife finally emerged from the shadows, she didn't just leave her billionaire husband. She burned his empire to the ground. This is The Billionaire Ignored His Wife Until She Shocked Everyone. The silence in the penthouse at 432 Park Avenue was expensive. It was the kind of silence that cost $50 million to curate, insulated from the chaotic hum of Manhattan below by triple-paned glass and heavy velvet curtains. Audrey Evans sat at the end of a mahogany dining table long enough to land a small plane on. The table was set for 2. The candles, imported beeswax from a monastery in France, had burned down to nubs, pooling wax onto the linen tablecloth. She checked her watch, a delicate vintage Cartier tank that had belonged to her grandmother. It was 11:45 p.m. Harrison wasn't coming. She shouldn't have been surprised. It was their 5th anniversary. He had missed the 3rd, a crisis in Tokyo, and the 4th, a merger with the Kensington Group. But this year, he had promised. He had looked her in the eye 3 days ago, buttoning his Charvet shirt, and said, "Audrey, book the table. I'll be there. I have a surprise for you." Audrey stood up, her joints stiff from hours of waiting. She blew out the last candle. The smoke curled up, a grey ribbon in the dark room. She walked to the floor-to-ceiling window looking out over Central Park. Below, the city was a grid of electric gold. Somewhere out there, Harrison Evans, the CEO of Evans Vane Capital, was living his life. A life that barely included her. To the outside world, Audrey was a mystery. The tabloids called her the Mouse. She was rarely seen at the galas Harrison attended. When she did attend, she wore muted colors, grays, beiges, soft pastels that blended into the wallpaper. Harrison preferred it that way. "Don't draw attention, Audrey," he would say, his hand gripping her elbow just a little too tight. "My investors want a stable, quiet family man, not a circus." So she became quiet. She became the ghost he wanted. Her phone buzzed on the sideboard, a text from Harrison. "Deal running late. Don't wait up." H. "No happy anniversary. No I'm sorry. Just efficiency," Audrey sighed, picking up the plates to carry them to the kitchen herself, despite the staff quarters being just down the hall. She hated bothering Mrs. Higgins this late. As she scraped the coq au vin into the trash, she noticed Harrison's briefcase sitting on the marble island. He must have stopped by earlier in the day to drop off files and forgotten it. It was unlike him. Harrison was meticulous. Curiosity, cold and sharp, pricked her. She knew the code, his birthday. She clicked the latches open. Inside were the usual suspects, merger documents, a tablet, legal briefs. But tucked into a side pocket was a small velvet box. Her heart leapt. The surprise. He had remembered. Maybe the text was just a cover because he was stuck. But he had bought the gift. She opened the box. It was a bracelet. Not just any bracelet. A Van Cleef & Arpels Alhambra bracelet. Vintage, set with onyx and diamonds. It was stunning, heavy, expensive, but it wasn't her style. Harrison knew she only wore silver or white gold. This was yellow gold, and the wrist size. It looked tiny. Audrey had an athletic build. This would barely fit a child. Under the box was a receipt. Purchased. Yesterday, 4 p.m. Madison Avenue Boutique. Client note. Engraving requested. Forever yours, Jay. Audrey froze. Her name didn't start with J. She stared at the receipt until the letters blurred. J. There was only one J in Harrison's immediate orbit that mattered. Jessica Vane, the daughter of his late business partner. the vice president of communications at Evansvane, a woman who was everything Audrey wasn't, loud, blonde, terrifyingly ambitious, and always draped in yellow gold. Audrey didn't cry. That was the strange part. She expected tears, hysteria, the urge to throw the bracelet through the $50 million window. Instead, she felt a sudden, glacial calm settle over her. It was as if the last 5 years of fog had instantly evaporated. She placed the bracelet back in the box, snapped it shut, and put it back in the briefcase exactly as she found it. She walked back to the window. The reflection staring back at her was pale, wearing a beige cardigan and no makeup. The mouse. "Happy anniversary, Audrey," she whispered to the glass. She went to the bedroom, but she didn't sleep. She pulled a suitcase from the back of the closet, not the Louis Vuitton luggage Harrison insisted she use, but an old, battered leather duffel bag she had owned before she became Mrs. Evans. She didn't pack clothes, she packed documents. 2 days later, Audrey decided to test the waters. She needed to be sure. The receipt was damning, but she needed to see it in his eyes. Harrison was hosting a lunch at the Obsidian Club, an ultra-exclusive members-only establishment in Midtown. It was the kind of place where billionaires went to avoid millionaires. The walls were lined with dark oak, and the air smelled of aged scotch and old money. Audrey had never been to the Obsidian. Harrison never took her. "It's business, Audrey. Boring stuff. You'd hate it." She dressed carefully, not in her usual beige, but in a navy blue dress that was tailored and sharp. She pulled her dark hair back into a severe bun. She looked less like a wife and more like an executive. She walked past the doorman, who hesitated. "Name, madam?" "Audrey Evans. My husband is expecting me." Her voice was steady, banking on the fact that even if they didn't know her face, they wouldn't dare question the Evans name. The doorman nodded and opened the heavy brass doors. The dining room was buzzing with the low murmur of power. Audrey scanned the room and found him instantly. Harrison was sitting at a corner booth, the power table. He wasn't alone. Sitting next to him, laughing with her hand resting casually on his forearm, was Jessica Vane. Jessica was radiant in a canary yellow suit, and there, glinting on her wrist under the soft lighting of the chandelier, was the Van Cleef onyx bracelet. Audrey felt a physical blow to her chest, but she kept walking. She approached the table. Harrison saw her first. His smile dropped. He looked like he had seen a ghost. Not a scary ghost, an inconvenient one. "Audrey," he said, his voice loud enough to turn heads. "What are you doing here?" Jessica stopped laughing. She looked Audrey up and down with a smirk that was barely concealed. She didn't remove her hand from Harrison's arm. "I happened to be in the area," Audrey said, forcing a polite smile. "I thought I'd say hello." "We are in the middle of a strategy meeting," Harrison snapped, his face reddening. "This isn't a social call." "I can see that," Audrey said, her eyes dropping pointedly to Jessica's wrist. Jessica caught the look. She twisted the bracelet, making the diamonds catch the light. "Oh, hello, Audrey. Harrison was just telling me about your gardening projects. How quaint." The table was surrounded by 3 other men, investors from the Gulf. They looked uncomfortable. "Harrison," one of the investors said, "is this your wife?" Harrison looked at Audrey with pure irritation. He stood up, grabbing her arm and steering her away from the table toward the coat check. "What is wrong with you?" he hissed, his voice dropping to a venomous whisper. "You don't just walk into the Obsidian. You're embarrassing me." "Embarrassing you?" Audrey asked calmly. "By being your wife. By interrupting business," he growled. "Look at you. You look plain. These men expect high glamour, Audrey. They expect power. You look like a librarian who got lost." "I see," Audrey said. "And Jessica? Does she look like power?" "Jessica is a vital asset to this company," Harrison said defensively. "She knows how to play the game. You? You're supposed to be the piece at home. Go home, Audrey. I'll deal with you later." He turned his back on her and walked back to the table. He sat down, said something that made the table laugh, and poured more wine for Jessica. Audrey stood near the entrance, her hands trembling, not from sadness, but from rage. "Rough day?" The voice came from the bar. Audrey turned. Sitting on a stool, nursing a sparkling water with lime, was a man she recognized but hadn't seen in years. Ethan Cole. 10 years ago, before Harrison, before the money, Audrey and Ethan had been interns at the same chaotic startup in Brooklyn. Ethan had been the tech genius, brilliant, messy, always wearing hoodies. Now he was wearing a bespoke suit that cost more than a car, but he still had that sharp, intelligent glint in his eyes. Ethan Cole was now the founder of Nebula Systems, a tech conglomerate that rivaled Evansvane in valuation. "Ethan," Audrey blinked. He smiled. "I wasn't sure it was you. You look different, restrained." "I'm married now," she said, the words tasting like ash. "I know. To Harrison Evans." Ethan glanced toward the corner table. He saw Harrison, Jessica, and the hand on the arm. He looked back at Audrey, his expression softening into understanding. "I see." "I should go," Audrey said, adjusting her purse. "Audrey," Ethan said, sliding off the stool, "you were the smartest strategist in our intern class. You saved that startup from bankruptcy twice before you quit to support him." He gestured toward Harrison. "Does he know?" "Know what?" "That you're the one who wrote the algorithm that made his first hedge fund profitable. I remember you working on it in the coffee shop." Audrey stiffened. That was a secret. He forgot." "He didn't forget," Ethan said darkly. "He ignored it. There's a difference." He pulled a business card out of his pocket. It wasn't paper, it was heavy, matte black metal. "I'm hosting a charity gala next month," Ethan said. "The Midnight Ball. It's going to be the biggest event of the season. Harrison is desperate for an invite because he wants to acquire my AI division. He's going to be there." So, Ethan leaned in, his voice low. "Don't come as his wife. Come as yourself. Come as the woman who wrote the algorithm." Audrey looked at the card. Then she looked back at Harrison, who was toasting Jessica's glass. "I don't have anything to wear," Audrey whispered. Ethan grinned, and for a second he looked like the boy from Brooklyn. "I know a guy. Call me." Audrey took the card. As she walked out of the Obsidian Club, the doorman held the door. This time she didn't look down. She looked straight ahead at the skyline. The mouse was dead. It was time for the lioness to wake up. The office of Dominic Cross was less like a law firm and more like a shark tank. Located on the 60th floor of a Glass Needle in Hudson Yards, it offered a panoramic view of the city that Audrey felt she was finally seeing clearly for the first time. Dominic Cross was the divorce attorney you hired when you wanted to scorch the earth. He was 50, tanned, and wore a suit that cost more than Audrey's first car. He reviewed the documents Audrey had pulled from the old duffel bag, his reading glasses perched on the end of his nose. "This is interesting," Dominic murmured, tapping a yellowed piece of paper. "Very interesting." "Is it enough?" Audrey asked. She was gripping her purse so hard her knuckles were white. "Mrs. Evans, most people think divorce is about who gets the house and who gets the dog," Dominic said, taking off his glasses. "But in your case, it's about intellectual property. You're telling me that the core trading algorithm, The Vanguard code that launched Evans Vane Capital was written by you? I wrote it on a napkin and then coded it on a laptop in our one-bedroom apartment in Brooklyn, Audrey said. Harrison was good at sales. He was good at shaking hands, but he couldn't code to save his life. I built the engine. He just painted the car. And you never signed over the rights? We were newlyweds, Audrey said softly. I trusted him. I didn't think I needed a contract to protect me from my husband. Dominic smiled, a predatory expression that made Audrey feel safe for the first time in years. Harrison Evans is currently evaluating his company at $4 billion for a potential merger. If we can prove the foundation of that company belongs to you, well, you don't just get half. You get the leverage to destroy him. I don't just want money, Mr. Cross, Audrey said, her voice hardening. I want him to know that I'm not invisible. Oh, he'll know, Dominic said. But first, we have to blindside him. You need to maintain the charade, the loving, submissive wife. Can you do that for 2 more weeks? I've done it for 5 years, Audrey said. 2 weeks is nothing. Later that afternoon, Audrey met Ethan Cole at a nondescript warehouse in Chelsea. There was no sign on the door, just a keypad. Ethan punched in a code and ushered her inside. It wasn't a warehouse, it was an atelier. Rolls of silk, chiffon, and velvet were stacked to the ceiling. In the center of the room, a man with silver hair and measuring tape around his neck was sketching furiously. Audrey, meet Lazaro, Ethan said. He doesn't do fashion weeks anymore. He only designs for private clients, royalty mostly. Lazaro looked up. He had piercing blue eyes that seemed to scan Audrey's soul rather than her measurements. He frowned. She is hiding, Lazaro said, his accent thick and European. Her posture is apologetic. Why do you apologize for taking up space, Bella? Audrey straightened her spine. I'm done apologizing. Good, Lazaro said. He walked around her. Ethan tells me you are crashing the midnight ball. The theme is celestial bodies. Everyone will be wearing sparkles, stars, gold, silver. They will look like Christmas ornaments. I don't want to blend in, Audrey said. No, Lazaro agreed. Harrison Evans will be there. Yes. With his mistress. Lazaro nodded solemnly, as if discussing a funeral arrangement. Then we do not dress you as a star. We dress you as the void, the darkness that makes the stars look bright, dangerous, infinite. He began to sketch. Audrey watched the lines form on the paper. It wasn't just a dress, it was a weapon. One condition, Ethan said, leaning against a table. You walk in with me, as my partner. Not my date, my equal. Evans Vane is trying to acquire my AI division. Harrison thinks I'm playing hard to get. If I walk in with his wife on my arm, it'll shatter his negotiation leverage before he even opens his mouth. Audrey looked at Ethan. Why are you doing this, Ethan? Is it just business? Ethan looked down at his shoes, then back at her. I hated watching you fade, Audrey. The smartest girl in the room became a decoration. It offended me. Audrey felt a lump in her throat. Thank you. Don't thank me yet, Ethan grinned. Wait until you see the bill. The next 2 weeks were a masterclass in acting. Audrey played the part of the doting wife perfectly. She laid out Harrison's vitamins. She nodded when he talked about how stressful his meetings with Jessica were. She even signed the anniversary card he bought her 3 days late, a generic Hallmark card signed by his assistant. 3 days before the gala, Harrison came home early. He was in a foul mood. Ethan Cole is stonewalling me, Harrison complained, loosening his tie. He poured himself a whiskey, ignoring Audrey, who was reading a book on the sofa. He's playing games. I need to close this deal at the midnight ball. It's critical. Is there anything I can do? Audrey asked innocently. Harrison laughed. It was a short, sharp bark of a sound. You? Audrey, sweetheart, this is high-level tech acquisition. Unless you can suddenly code a neural network, you're useless here. The irony was so thick, Audrey almost choked on it. She had coded the neural network he was using to evaluate the deal. I suppose you're right, she said. So, about the gala. Should I buy a dress? Harrison swirled his drink. Actually, I was thinking it's better if you sit this one out. It's going to be crowded, loud, lots of press. You know how you get anxious. I don't get anxious, Harrison. You just tell people I do. He narrowed his eyes. Don't start. Jessica will be there handling the PR. I need to focus on Ethan Cole. Having you there trailing behind me like a lost puppy will just be a distraction. Stay home. Order in. Watch a movie. Okay, Audrey said. I'll stay home. Harrison looked relieved. He kissed her on the forehead. A dry, passionless peck. That's a good girl. You make my life so much easier when you're low maintenance. Audrey watched him walk into his home office and shut the door. Enjoy your peace, Harrison, she whispered. It's the last you'll ever have. The day of the midnight ball, New York City was electric. Helicopters buzzed overhead, ferrying VIPs from the Hamptons. The Metropolitan Museum of Art had been transformed into a celestial palace. At the penthouse, the atmosphere was tense. Harrison was in a panic. His tuxedo fitting hadn't gone well, and he was screaming at his tailor over the phone. Audrey sat at the kitchen island, drinking herbal tea, wearing a plush white bathrobe. "Where are my cufflinks?" Harrison shouted, storming into the kitchen. "The onyx ones." "Top drawer, left side," Audrey said, without looking up. He found them. He didn't say thank you. He was sweating. "I have to leave early. Jessica has a pre-gala press junket at the Pierre Hotel. I need to be there for the photos." "Of course," Audrey said. "You should go." Harrison paused at the door. He looked at her, sitting there in her robe, face scrubbed clean, hair in a messy bun. For a second, he seemed to feel a pang of something. Pity? Guilt? "Don't wait up," he said. "I'll probably crash at the city apartment tonight. Late negotiations." The city apartment was code for Jessica's condo in Soho. Audrey knew it. He knew she knew it, though they never said it aloud. "Good luck with Ethan Cole," Audrey said, taking a sip of tea. "I don't need luck," Harrison sneered, adjusting his lapels. "I have money. Everyone has a price." The elevator doors slid shut, sealing him away. The moment the numbers above the elevator started going down, Audrey moved. She stood up and untied her robe, letting it drop to the floor. Underneath, she wasn't wearing pajamas. She was wearing sheer silk lingerie. "You can come out now," she said to the empty room. The service door to the kitchen opened. A team of 4 people walked in, led by Lazaro and a makeup artist named Jin. They were carrying garment bags, metal cases, and a sense of military urgency. "He is gone?" Lazaro asked. "He is gone," Audrey confirmed. "Then we have 3 hours to build a queen," Lazaro said, clapping his hands. "Jin, her face, it must be sharp. No soft blushes. Contouring that could cut glass." Audrey sat in the chair, usually reserved for Harrison at the head of the table. For the next 3 hours she was transformed. Her hair, usually worn loose or in a messy bun, was pulled back into a sleek, architectural updo that defied gravity, exposing her long, elegant neck. The makeup was dramatic, smoky eyes with hints of iridescent blue, lips painted a deep, blood red that looked like a warning sign. Then came the dress. Lazaro unzipped the garment bag. The dress didn't rustle. It shimmered. It was a deep, midnight black velvet that absorbed the light, fitted tight to her body like a second skin. But woven into the fabric were thousands of tiny, crushed sapphires and diamonds. When she moved, she didn't sparkle. She glowed like a galaxy turning in the deep void of space. The back of the dress plunged dangerously low, revealing the tattoo Audrey had gotten 3 days ago, a small, geometric set of coordinates. The coordinates of the garage where she and Harrison had started the company, a reminder of what she owned. She stepped into the dress. It fit perfectly. It forced her to stand tall, to move with purpose. Lazaro handed her the accessories. No necklace. It would distract from the neckline. Instead, long, dramatic diamond drop earrings that brushed her collarbone. And finally, on her right wrist, she didn't wear diamonds. She put on her old, scratched Apple Watch with a cheap silicone band. "The watch?" Lazaro asked, horrified. "It's a prop," Audrey said, tapping the screen. It was connected to the venue's projection system, thanks to Ethan's tech team. For the finale. Her phone buzzed. "Ethan, I'm downstairs. The chariot awaits." Audrey looked at herself in the floor-to-ceiling mirror. The mouse was gone. The woman staring back was terrifying. She was beautiful, yes, but in the way a thunderstorm is beautiful. "Mrs. Evans?" Jin asked nervously. "Are you ready?" Audrey turned to the door. "Mrs. Evans is staying home tonight," she said coolly. "Tonight I'm Audrey Vane." Vane was her maiden name, a name she had given up for Harrison, a name she was taking back. She walked to the elevator. The red carpet was a chaotic sea of flashing lights. Reporters were screaming names. Harrison Evans stood near the entrance, looking dapper but strained. Jessica Vane was clinging to his arm, wearing a gold-sequined dress that was loud and aggressive. She was soaking up the attention, posing for cameras, laughing too loudly. "They love us," Jessica whispered in Harrison's ear. "They love the money," Harrison muttered, scanning the crowd. "Where is Ethan? He should be here by now." "Maybe he got cold feet," Jessica laughed. "He knows you're going to buy him out. He's scared." "He should be," Harrison said. Suddenly, the crowd went quiet. Then, a collective gasp rippled through the line of photographers. The screaming stopped, replaced by the frantic, rapid-fire clicking of shutters, the sound of 1,000 mechanical cicadas. "Who is that?" someone whispered. Harrison turned around, annoyed by the distraction. A black limousine had pulled up. Not the usual town cars, but a vintage Rolls-Royce Phantom. The door opened. Ethan Cole stepped out first, looking devastating in a midnight blue tuxedo. He turned and offered his hand to the person inside. A leg emerged, high slit, black velvet. Then Audrey stepped out. The silence was deafening. She stood on the pavement for a moment, the flashes illuminating her dress like lightning strikes. She looked taller, statuesque, untouchable. She looked at the cameras not with fear, but with total command. She took Ethan's arm. "Is that—" Jessica's voice trailed off. She sounded choked. Harrison felt the blood drain from his face. His knees actually buckled slightly. He blinked, sure he was hallucinating. "Audrey?" he whispered. But she didn't look at him. She didn't even acknowledge his existence. She walked up the stairs with Ethan, moving through the crowd like Moses parting the Red Sea. As they passed Harrison and Jessica, Audrey paused. She turned her head slowly. Her dark eyes locked onto Harrison's. There was no love in them, no anger, just cold, clinical amusement. "Hello, Harrison," she said, her voice smooth and carrying over the quiet crowd. "You were right. I decided not to stay home." She looked at Jessica, then at the cheap-looking gold dress. "Cute," Audrey said. And then she walked away, leaving Harrison Evans standing with his mouth open, while 100 cameras pivoted away from him to follow his wife. The game had begun. Inside the Metropolitan Museum of Art, the Temple of Denda was bathed in rotating constellations projected onto the ancient sandstone walls. The air smelled of $50,000 worth of imported white orchids and expensive champagne. The moment Audrey stepped into the great hall on Ethan's arm, the atmospheric pressure in the room changed. The ambient chatter of New York's elite, hedge fund managers, Hollywood A-listers, tech moguls, didn't just quiet down. It shifted direction. Normally, Harrison Evans was the sun everyone orbited. He would hold court near the bar, dispensing loud opinions, while people laughed too hard at his jokes, hoping some of his Midas touch would rub off. Tonight, Harrison and Jessica were standing near an ice sculpture of Pegasus, looking stranded. People were politely nodding at them, and then immediately looking past them, toward the entrance. Audrey moved through the room like a dark nebula, absorbing the light. The velvet dress was a masterpiece of engineering. Every step made the crushed diamonds woven into the fabric ripple like distant stars. "They're staring," Ethan murmured, taking 2 flutes of vintage Dom Perignon from a passing waiter and handing one to Audrey. "Let them stare," Audrey said, taking a sip. The champagne tasted cold and sharp. "They've looked right through me for 5 years. It's time they saw something." "Harrison looks like he's having an aneurysm," Ethan observed dryly. Harrison was indeed struggling. He had watched his mouse wife walk in looking like a vampiric queen, and his brain couldn't process it. He excused himself from a bewildered oil tycoon and intercepted Audrey near the Egyptian exhibit. He grabbed her elbow, his grip hard. The old habit. Audrey didn't flinch. She just looked down at his hand on her arm, then slowly up at his face. Her expression was one of mild distaste, as if a waiter had spilled soup on her. "Let go," she said. Her voice was low, but it had the cutting edge of a diamond saw. Harrison, stunned by the sheer authority in her tone, actually let go. "What is this game, Audrey?" he hissed, his eyes darting around to see who was watching. "Who paid for that dress? Why are you with Cole? You're making a scene." "I'm not making a scene, Harrison. I am the scene," Audrey corrected him. "And as for Ethan, he's simply better company than an empty apartment. You told me to find a hobby. I did. It's called living." Jessica appeared at Harrison's side, her gold sequins rattling nervously. Up close, against Audrey's sleek, terrifying elegance, Jessica looked cheap, like costume jewelry next to the Hope diamond. "Well," Jessica sniffed, looking Audrey up and down. "It's certainly a bold look, a bit gothic for a spring gala, isn't it?" Audrey smiled. It was a terrifying smile. "The theme is celestial bodies, Jessica. Space is cold, dark, and infinite. You came dressed as a disco ball. We are not the same." Someone nearby snickered. It was the editor-in-chief of Vogue. Jessica turned bright red. Before Harrison could retort, the CEO of Goldman Sachs walked right past him and extended a hand to Audrey. "Mrs. Evans," the CEO said warmly. "Or should I say, the woman of the hour. I was just talking to Ethan. He tells me you have some fascinating insights into algorithmic trading trends." Harrison's jaw dropped. "Audrey? Insights? She doesn't even know how to turn on her laptop half the time." The Goldman CEO looked at Harrison with polite confusion. "Really? Because Ethan says she's the sharpest mind he's talked to in a decade." Audrey smiled graciously at the CEO. "Harrison likes to keep me humble, David. We were just discussing the latency issues in high-frequency trading models during volatile markets. I have some thoughts on how quantum computing might solve that." She then launched into a 30-second, highly technical explanation that went completely over Harrison's head, but made the Goldman CEO nod enthusiastically. Harrison stood there, mute. He recognized the words. They were the buzzwords he paid his CTO millions to understand. But coming out of Audrey's mouth, they sounded like an alien language. "Excuse us, Harrison," Audrey said coolly. "David and I have business to discuss." She walked away, leaving her husband standing next to his mistress and an ice sculpture, utterly irrelevant in the one room where he used to be king. The humiliation wasn't loud. No drinks were thrown. It was worse. It was a slow, social suffocation. For the next 2 hours, Audrey was the center of every important circle. Harrison was on the outside, looking in, realizing with growing horror that without the silent partner he had taken for granted, he was just a man in a suit. But the real show hadn't even started yet. At 10 p.m. the lights dimmed. A spotlight hit the main stage in front of the Temple of Denda. It was time for the speeches and the major industry announcements that defined the midnight ball. Harrison adjusted his tie. This was his moment to recover. He was scheduled to speak first. He was going to announce the merger framework with Ethan Cole's company, Nebula Systems. It would spike Evans Vane's stock price by 20% overnight. It would remind everyone who the real alpha was. He jogged up the steps to the podium, flashing his practiced, charming smile. "Ladies and gentlemen, titans of industry," Harrison began, his voice booming over the speakers. He looked out over the crowd. He saw Audrey sitting in the front row between Ethan Cole and the Goldman CEO. He ignored her. "Tonight is about the stars," Harrison continued. "And at Evans Vane Capital, we are reaching for them. For 5 years, we have led the market through innovation and sheer grit. And tonight," he paused for dramatic effect, looking towards Ethan. "Tonight, I am thrilled to announce that we are entering final negotiations to acquire the AI division of Nebula Systems. Together, we will build the future of finance." There was polite applause. Harrison beamed. He had done it. He had bluffed his way through. Then Ethan Cole stood up. He didn't walk to the stairs. He just stood at his table in the front row, holding a microphone that had been casually handed to him by a sound technician. "Actually, Harrison," Ethan's voice cut through the applause, crisp and clear, "I have a slight correction to make." The room went dead silent. Harrison froze at the podium, his smile fixed in a rictus of confusion. "There are no negotiations," Ethan said pleasantly. "Nebula Systems is not for sale, especially not to Evans Vane." A murmur ran through the crowd. This was a public execution. "But," Ethan continued, "Harrison is right about one thing. Tonight is about the future of finance, and I am announcing a partnership tonight, but not with Harrison Evans." Ethan turned and extended his hand toward the woman sitting next to him. "Ladies and gentlemen, the true architect of the last decade's financial revolution, the creator of the Vanguard trading algorithm that powers half the hedge funds in this room, including Harrison's. My new partner, Audrey Vane." The spotlight swung violently from Harrison to Audrey. Audrey stood up slowly. The black velvet dress seemed to absorb the light, making her look impossibly formidable. She didn't smile. She walked up the stairs to the stage, passing Harrison as if he were a piece of furniture. She took the podium. Harrison was still standing there, paralyzed, his face draining of color. Audrey raised her right wrist. The cheap, scratched Apple Watch was glowing. She tapped the screen. Behind her, the massive projection screen that had been showing galaxies suddenly went black. Then, lines of green code began to scroll down the screen rapidly. It was beautiful, complex, dense code. 5 years ago, Audrey spoke into the microphone, her voice steady and calm. "I sat in a one-bedroom apartment in Brooklyn and wrote this code on a refurbished laptop. I called it Project Vanguard. It was designed to predict market volatility based on non-traditional data points. She tapped the watch again. The scrolling code stopped, highlighting a header section at the very top of the file. The projection was massive. Everyone in the room could read it. Project Vanguard. Source code. Author, Audrey Vane. Creation date, October 14th, 2018. Timestamp, 0342M. Property of Audrey Vane. Do not distribute. A collective gasp sucked the air out of the room. The date was 2 years before Harrison Evans had launched his flagship fund. 2 years before he became the boy genius of Wall Street. Harrison Evans didn't write the code that made him a billionaire, Audrey said, her voice ringing with absolute truth. He married the person who did. And then he convinced her to stay quiet, to stay small, so he could feel big. She turned to look at Harrison, who was trembling. He looked smaller than she had ever seen him. "You wanted a trophy wife, Harrison," Audrey said into the mic, addressing him directly in front of 500 of the most powerful people on Earth. "You forgot that trophies are earned. You didn't earn me, and you certainly didn't earn this." She gestured to the giant screen displaying her intellectual property. "Effective tomorrow morning, my legal team is filing for divorce," Audrey announced to the room. "We are also filing an injunction against Evans Vane Capital for the unauthorized usage of my intellectual property for the past 5 years. We will be seeking full restitution and damages, which, by my estimation, amounts to roughly 70% of the company's current valuation." She paused, letting the number sink in. Harrison Evans wasn't just going to be divorced. He was going to be liquidated. "The mouse is dead, Harrison," Audrey whispered, loud enough only for the microphone to catch it. She turned and walked off the stage. The silence lasted for 3 seconds. Then, pandemonium broke out. Reporters were shouting into phones. Investors were frantically texting their brokers to dump Evans Vane stock before the markets opened. Harrison Evans stood alone on the stage under the harsh spotlight, a man stripped bare, watching his empire dissolve into green lines of code written by the wife he never bothered to know. In the crowd, Jessica Vane slipped out a side exit, leaving Harrison to face the music alone. The rats were already fleeing the sinking ship. The morning after the midnight ball, Harrison Evans woke up to a sound he had never heard before. The silence of a phone that had stopped ringing because the voicemail box was full. He was in Jessica Vane's Soho loft. The sunlight streaming through the floor-to-ceiling windows felt harsh, unforgiving. He reached for his phone on the nightstand. The screen was a wall of notifications, but not the kind he was used to. There were no congratulatory texts from senators or jealousy-tinged messages from rivals. There were alerts from the Wall Street Journal, Bloomberg, and the New York Times. Evans Vane stock plummets 45% in pre-market trading. The Vanguard scandal. Wife of billionaire claims ownership of core algorithm. SEC launches. Probe into intellectual property fraud at Evans Vane. Harrison sat up, his head pounding. The previous night was a blur of flashing cameras and the humiliating echo of Ethan Cole's voice. He looked over at the other side of the bed. It was empty. He walked into the living room. Jessica was there, dressed in a bathrobe, pacing back and forth while screaming into her phone. "I didn't know! How was I supposed to know?" Jessica yelled, spotting Harrison. She glared at him, her eyes rimmed with red, not from crying, but from lack of sleep and fury. "I am the VP of Communications. Do you know what my inbox looks like? They are calling me a complicit fraud, Harrison." She hung up the phone and threw it onto the couch. "Good morning to you too," Harrison muttered, rubbing his temples. "We need to issue a statement. Deny everything. Say Audrey is mentally unstable. Say it's a bitter divorce tactic." Jessica laughed, a cold, sharp sound. Deny it? Harrison, she put the source code on a 40-foot screen. The timestamps were verified by 3 independent tech blogs before sunrise. The metadata is ironclad. You didn't just steal her work, you built a glass house on a foundation of dynamite, and she just lit the fuse. We can fix this, Harrison said, though his voice lacked conviction. I'll call my lawyers. We'll sue for defamation. There is no we anymore, Jessica said, tightening the belt of her robe. Harrison froze. What? I'm resigning, Jessica said. My resignation letter is already with HR. And as for us? She looked him up and down with a look of pure disdain. I don't date failures, Harrison. I certainly don't date men who are about to be indicted. You're leaving me? Harrison asked, incredulous. Now? After everything I bought you? The apartment? The car? You bought them with company money, Jessica snapped. Money that apparently belongs to your wife. Get dressed, Harrison. You need to leave. My lawyer advised me not to be seen with you. 10 minutes later, Harrison Evans was standing on the sidewalk in Soho, holding his tuxedo jacket, watching the door of the luxury building slam shut in his face. It was the first domino in a long, agonizing chain reaction. 1 week later, the conference room at Dominic Cross's law firm was quiet, a stark contrast to the chaos outside. Audrey sat at the head of the table. She looked rested. For the first time in 5 years, the dark circles under her eyes were gone. Dominic placed a thick binder on the table. The forensic audit is complete. And? Audrey asked. It's worse than we thought, Dominic said, opening the file. Harrison wasn't just using your algorithm. He was over-leveraging the funds based on the algorithm's predictive success. He was borrowing against future earnings that technically didn't exist yet. When the stock tanked last week, the banks issued margin calls. He doesn't have the cash to cover them. Audrey stared at the numbers. It was a roadmap of greed. So he's broke, Audrey stated. Functionally, yes. His personal assets are tied to the company stock, which is currently trading at junk status. The yacht has been seized by the creditors. The Hamptons estate is in foreclosure as of this morning to cover the bank loans. Dominic leaned back. He has the penthouse, but the maintenance fees alone will bankrupt him in 6 months. He is currently living in a corporate housing unit in Queens, provided by the firm's liquidation team. And the IP? Audrey asked. The Vanguard code? The court granted the injunction. Dominic smiled. Evans' vein is barred from using the algorithm effective immediately. Without it, their trading models are useless. The board voted to dissolve the fund yesterday. They are liquidating the remaining assets to pay off investors. Audrey nodded slowly. She didn't feel the rush of adrenaline she expected. She felt a solemn finality. It was like watching a controlled demolition of a condemned building. He wants a meeting, Dominic said softly. Audrey looked up. Harrison? He's refusing to sign the final divorce papers unless he sees you. He claims there are personal matters to discuss. I can have him removed, Audrey. You don't have to see him. Audrey stood up and walked to the window, looking out over the Hudson River. She thought about the last 5 years, the silences, the lonely dinners, the way he looked through her. She needed to close the book. Not for him, but for her. Let him come, Audrey said. But he comes here. I'm not going to him. Harrison arrived at 2 p.m. He looked like a ghost of the man who had commanded the midnight ball. He was wearing a suit, but it was wrinkled. He hadn't shaved in a few days. The confident swagger was replaced by a stoop, as if the weight of the sky was pressing down on his shoulders. Audrey was sitting alone in the conference room. She didn't stand up when he entered. Audrey, Harrison said, his voice raspy. He pulled out a chair and sat down heavily. Harrison, she replied. Her tone was neutral, devoid of the warmth he used to ignore, but also devoid of the anger he expected. You really did it, he said, shaking his head. You burned it all down. $4 billion. Poof. Gone. I took back what was mine, Audrey corrected him. You were just holding it for me. Poorly. Harrison laughed bitterly. Was it worth it? Ruining me? I mean, I know I wasn't the best husband, but did I deserve this? Total annihilation? Audrey clasped her hands on the table. You still don't get it. This isn't about you being a bad husband, Harrison. This isn't about missed anniversaries or cold dinners. This is about theft. You looked me in the eye every day for 5 years, knowing that your genius, your reputation, your entire identity was built on my work. And you didn't just steal it. You tried to erase me, to hide the crime. You made me small so you wouldn't have to feel like a fraud. Harrison looked down at his hands. I was scared, he whispered. Scared of what? That if people knew, if they knew the code came from you, they wouldn't respect me. They wouldn't look at me the way they do. I needed to be the king, Audrey. I couldn't be the king if my wife was the wizard. So you made me the jester, Audrey said, and you found a queen who liked the gold more than the man. Harrison flinched at the mention of Jessica. She left me. The second the money dried up, she didn't even say goodbye, just a text message. I tried to tell you, Audrey said. You surrounded yourself with people who loved your wallet, not your soul. When the wallet closed, the room emptied. Harrison reached into his pocket. His hand was trembling. He pulled out a pen. The divorce decree sat between them on the mahogany table. If I sign this, Harrison said, his voice breaking, I have nothing. No company. No home. No wife. I'm 42 years old, Audrey. I'm starting over with less than I had when we were 20. You have your health, Audrey said simply, and you have a second chance. Don't waste it trying to be a billionaire, Harrison. Try being a human being this time. Harrison stared at the paper. Tears welled up in his eyes, spilling over onto his cheeks. It was the first time Audrey had seen him cry since his mother died years ago. I miss you, he choked out. I realized it too late. In that apartment in Queens, looking at the cracked ceiling, I missed your tea. I missed you reading on the couch. I missed the way you listened to me. Audrey felt a pang of pity, but she smothered it before it could grow. Pity was dangerous. Pity was what had kept her in the marriage for 5 years. You miss the comfort, Harrison, she said firmly. You miss having a fan. But I'm not a fan anymore. I'm the main character of my own life. She reached into her purse and pulled out the small velvet box containing the Van Cleef & Arpels bracelet. She slid it across the table. Take this, she said. Harrison looked at the box, confused. The bracelet? Sell it, Audrey said. It's worth about $15,000. That should cover your rent in Queens for a few months, while you look for a job. Consider it my final alimony payment. Harrison stared at the box. The irony crashed over him. The gift he had bought for his mistress was now the only lifeline his wife was offering him. He picked up the pen. With a shaking hand, he signed the document. Harrison Evans. He pushed the papers back to her. Goodbye, Audrey, he whispered. Goodbye, Harrison. He stood up, took the velvet box, and walked to the door. He paused, his hand on the handle, looking back one last time. He opened his mouth to say something, maybe an apology, maybe a plea, but he saw Audrey was already looking down at her phone, typing a message. She had already moved on. He walked out, and the door clicked shut. 3 months later, the offices of Nebula Systems were buzzing with energy. Audrey walked through the open-plan floor, holding a tablet. She was wearing a structured navy blazer and jeans, her hair loose and wavy. She stopped at a desk where a young female intern was struggling with a line of code. "You're missing a syntax bracket on line 40, Audrey said, leaning over. The intern looked up, eyes wide. "Oh, thank you, Ms. Vane." "Just Audrey." She smiled. "Audrey." Ethan Cole's voice boomed from his office. He was waving her over. Audrey walked into his office. The view from here was different than Harrison's penthouse. It looked out over Brooklyn, toward the bridge. It looked like potential. "The Tokyo investors just left," Ethan said, grinning. "They loved the new volatility patch. They want to double their commitment." "I told you they would," Audrey said, sitting on the edge of his desk. "The math doesn't lie." "You know," Ethan said, his expression softening. "Harrison's bankruptcy finalized yesterday. It was in the papers." "I know," Audrey said. "I didn't read it." "He's working as a consultant for a mid-tier logistics firm in Jersey," Ethan added. "A far cry from Wall Street." Audrey looked out the window. "I hope he finds what he's looking for. But I really don't care anymore." She looked back at Ethan. "Are we done talking about the past? We have a product launch in 2 weeks." Ethan laughed. "You're terrifying, you know that?" "I've been told," Audrey grinned. She walked out of the office, her heels clicking rhythmically on the concrete floor. She wasn't the billionaire's wife anymore. She wasn't the mouse. She was Audrey Vane, the architect. And for the first time in her life, she wasn't building someone else's castle. She was building her own. Harrison Evans spent his whole life chasing value, but he missed the most valuable asset he ever had, sitting right across the dinner table. He thought Audrey was just a background character in his movie. He didn't realize she was the one writing the script. In the end, Audrey didn't just take half his money. She took back her name, her dignity, and her genius. It's a brutal lesson for everyone. Be careful who you ignore. The person holding the flashlight knows exactly how to leave you in the dark. If you enjoyed this story of ultimate revenge and justice, please hit that like button. It really helps the channel. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss a story. Share this video with someone who needs a reminder of their own worth. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.